Well, I just want to welcome you all to Liverpool Echo and say thank you to our special guest this morning, leader of the Labour Party, Arsenal fan, as documented, and potentially our next Prime Minister, maybe?
That's what we hope.
That's what we hope. I also want to say thank you to our equally special guests, and that's our pupils, our sixth formers, who are here with us today.
Is it 3 different schools we got here?
So we've got Sacred Heart from Bootle. I don't know if you want to give a little wave, Sacred Heart students.
Okay.
They're the brave ones on the front row.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We've got Calderstones School, which is in South Liverpool, in Mosley Hill. Back row.
The back row contingent.
The cool ones.
And in the middle, we've got the Bluecoat School in Wavertree. I really want to say thank you for you all coming, and also to your teachers who made this happen at quite short notice.
Teachers all over here.
Teachers are around.
No, really appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you all for coming this morning.
They've got some robust questions. I think
Very good.
It's fair to say. So be prepared. Also, we've got lots of questions. We've only got 35 minutes, so forgive us if we're a bit blunt sometimes in moving people on, because we want to get to as many people as possible. Anything you want to say, Keir, before we kick off?
No, just thank you very much for coming. I really enjoy these sessions, so make sure that as well as asking questions, you're letting me know what you think as well, because what I tend to do in sessions like this is to mull over what you've said on the way home and just think about how that fits in with what we're doing. So this is a chance, I hope, not just to ask me questions, which is really good, but also to make me think, and then your chance, if you like, to put your fingerprint on something that the Labour Party might do at the next election, and then if we do get it over the line, your fingerprint on something might happen for the country. So think of it in that way as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Do
you want to kick off, Liam?
Yes, we'll kick off with a very topical question first of all, from Ruby Houghton at Sacred Heart, if you want to ask about the schools issue.
Yeah.
Ruby.
So why has it taken so long for the government to respond to the recent black crisis, and why didn't Labour push the issue earlier?
Well, let me take the second bit of that. We did push it earlier. I did a speech earlier this year in which I was talking about the collapsing ceilings. We had PMQs last week, and the Prime Minister said we'd never raised it before. He's going to have to correct the record now because he's wrong about that. But the central point is a really important one. I'm assuming none of your schools are affected by this. Right, good. Because the idea of children and young people not being able to go to school now because the roof's falling in is a metaphor for everything that's gone wrong under this government. There are 2 important timelines. In 2010 there was a Labour programme to build more schools, and one of the first things that this government did when they came in 2010 was to cut that completely, and quite a lot of the schools that are now not able to have their classes in the ordinary way now were on that list, and they were cut. So that's really bad for the government 13 years ago. Second thing was in 2021, when the Prime Minister was then Chancellor, if you remember, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, there was a programme for school maintenance where it was suggested at one point that 300 schools needed better maintenance because of this problem. That was cut down to 100, and then he said, I'm only doing 50. And of those, they've only rebuilt and maintained 4 of them. So massive failure by the government. And yet another example of underinvestment, not taking key decisions, and now we are where we are.
Next question is from Caitlin Prescott from Bluecoat, and I think, Caitlin, you've got a question about devolution.
Caitlin, just to tell you, Caitlin, I've got a niece called Caitlin, and our social media team in the Labour Party is run by a woman called Caitlin, who's brilliant, and she's recruited 2 more Caitlins, so we've got 3 Caitlins in the Labour Party. So social media and digital. If your name's Caitlin, then you're probably in there.
So how would you balance an increasing desire for British English devolution in many Labour areas and the desire to consolidate yourself as a strong national government and nationally consistent policies?
I think the 2 can go together. So I think you can be strong by pushing power and decision making closer to people in their own place. So I fundamentally believe that people who've got skin in the game because they live in an area, or it's their community, or they work in an area, are probably the most vested in that area. They're the ones that care most about what happens in that area, in that place, and that they should have more power, more power over what they're doing. And that's why I think the government's Levelling Up project is, one, it's hopeless, but it's also the way they're doing it is wrong. So they've got a big pot of money in London, and they're sitting there saying, you tell us if you want to put this money, and we will decide whether we'll give it to you for this project or that project, rather than being brave enough to say, let's devolve this, let's pass this. Devolve's probably the wrong word. Release this to people in their place to make decisions about their place. And normally when that's done, those in the place, I mean, everybody is vested in what's going on. So I actually think you can do the two. I don't think it's a weak thing to release power to closer to where people are. I actually think it's a bold thing to do, and that's why I desperately think that we should do it.
That's a great question. That's going to make my story for later. That actually.
Okay, great.
Caitlin. Doing my job for me here. So now we're off to Calderstones School, and Sadia Hack-Prover, you've got a question about voters, vision, and the Labour Party.
Sadia.
Yeah, hi. So can you outline your vision for the Labour Party and how you
Yeah, our vision is to fix, build, and improve our country. I think everybody feels that things are pretty well broken now. Nothing's really working, and that's been going on for a very, very long time. So we've got to fix the fundamentals. I mean, the cost of living crisis is talked about all the time, and that's because it's very real. You will all have experienced it. You'll have seen it. People not able to do the things that they would expect to do. Wages not going up in material terms for over a decade now. That's a really big deal. Mortgages going through the roof. So all of the costs are going up, but the income isn't. So we've got to fix that. Then we've got to rebuild and go beyond it and improve the whole of the country. And one of the things, Sadia, that I want to do is have what I've called mission-driven Labour government. So instead of sticking plasters, which is all we've got at the moment, which is a problem, let's put a sticking plaster on it, we want to fix the fundamentals. An example I'll give of that is the health service. We have an NHS winter crisis every year. It'll come again this year. That word will start buzzing around. And what happens every year is there's a quick fix in about January, February that just about gets us through until the summer when the pressure on the NHS is slightly less. And then we go round again, the only difference being each year it just gets worse. We've got to fix the fundamentals, rebuild the NHS and make it fit for the future. Or to take another example in climate, it is good to cap energy bills because they're far too high for people to be able to pay. But you can't do that each and every year forever and ever and ever. You've got to have renewable energy, which is cheaper and more sustainable in the long run. So that's where the rebuild and improve for the future looks.
Next question is from Isaac Banks from Sacred Heart, and I think, Isaac, you've got a question about schools.
Isaac.
How would Labour improve the attainment gap between private and state schools?
We need to completely level up. It shouldn't make any difference whether you go to a private school or to a state school. And at the moment, it does make a difference. And I am genuinely still shocked that for quite a number of young people, where they're going to get to in life is still more determined by what their parents earn than their own ability. And that is completely wrong. That's why I've said we've got to shatter the class ceiling, because it is a class ceiling in many respects. I think the government's taken it a bit seriously, or at least literally, in relation to shattering the class ceiling in what's been going on with this concrete. So we've got to do that. Amongst the things that we need to do is to recruit more teachers and to retain more teachers. And I'm sure the teachers will all be listening in hard to this. But there are lots of people in secondary school who need better maths teachers, for example. We don't have enough maths teachers in core subjects. So we've said that there's a tax break at the moment for private schools. We want to end that and use that money directly to recruit more teachers in to secondary schools in particular, and to have a better package for retaining teachers, many of whom, and again you'll know from your own teachers, are working really hard and burning out much too quickly because of the pressure that they're under. But my aspiration is to get to a place where it does not matter whether you've gone to a state school or to a private school. One last thing, because I'd really like to get your feedback on this, because I feel very strongly about it. What I call confident speaking in young people, which is the ability to communicate well, to hold the attention of a room or a group of people, which is, I mean, through debating sometimes, but through other things, which is a skill that helps with learning, but a skill that's massively useful in the working environment as well. Do you do much debating and stuff like that? You do? But that in private schools, this is taught a lot, and there's a lot of confidence. It's not, I don't think, taught sufficiently in all of our state schools, and I'm really determined we should change that around. That ability, I mean, just fast forward in your lives, that ability to walk into an interview and be able to get across who you are, what you're capable of, have that eye contact, get your ideas across, and then if you get into a job, to be able to run a team or whatever it may be, hugely important. So confident speaking. There's a lot of work to do.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So we are back to the Bluecoat now, and Stephanie Curry, you've got a question about levelling up.
So what will levelling up mean for Liverpool as a city?
It will mean an economy that's thriving in Liverpool, a local economy that's thriving in Liverpool, public services that are working in Liverpool, the ability of everybody in and around Liverpool to reach their aspirations and to have proper opportunities as we go forward. What I don't want to see, because we've desperately got to grow our economy. The economy's been functioning very badly, in my view, for 13 years. So we've got to turn that around. There's then a choice for a government, which is how do you turn that around? Do you sort of turbocharge London and the South East and then say to the rest of the country, well, it's basically redistribution for you? I completely disagree with that model. Even though I want economic growth, I do not want that model. It's got to be a model where the growth, the thriving businesses are here in Liverpool so that you have a choice. Now, too many people feel I've got to leave the place I grew up in order to get the job I want. That shouldn't be the way life is. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't leave and go other places if that's what you want to do, but it shouldn't be that that's the norm, that, you know, the local economy isn't strong enough for me to do what I want with the skills. And if you think of the innovation, the potential of places like Liverpool, it's huge. And if you had a government that matched the ambition of people here, you'd be really motoring. And so that's what I mean by levelling up. Not this government's approach, which is that they will decide what's good for you. I just think that's a very disrespectful way of doing politics.
Thank you. Our next question is from Olivia Foreman from Calderstones. Olivia, I think you've got a question about unions.
So the former Chancellor of your leadership stated that the relationship between trade unions and the Labour Party was indivisible, part of the same fabric. So why do you still find the presence of influential shadow ministers within the
Well, Olivia, firstly, thank you for that question. The relationship between the Labour Party and trade unions is historic and present. So obviously, the Labour Party was formed to be the political party that would represent working people in Parliament, and it still should be. I think in recent years we've obviously lost elections. I think amongst the reasons for that is that we've lost sight of that goal, if you like, of being the party that represents working people in Parliament and changes politics for them. We do work with the unions all the time. You will know the TUC conference is going on here in Liverpool at the moment. Angela Rayner's about to take the stage at about 11:15. So if you get the chance, have a look at the clips coming out of that. It's a strong relationship. Doesn't mean we agree on everything, but it's a strong relationship where we work together. One of the things we've agreed is that there should be more rights for people in their workplace. So better dignity and respect and security for people at work. We've been hammering that out with the unions. We've now agreed the final script of something which will become legislation, I hope, if there's a Labour government. And so that's the sort of thing that we can do if we work together. And as for the picket line, I mean, let me just address that straight on. I'm running a political party, and I want the Labour Party to form the next government. Trade unions are running their unions, and they're sticking up for their workers, and some of them are in dispute, and it's quite right for them to be on the picket line because they're leading their union. My job is to join with them in a partnership that takes us into power. And most of the unions say what's more use to me here is that we get a Labour government that can actually improve the rights of working people. That is the single most important thing. And I got invited to the TUC annual dinner last night. It's a tradition and it's great, and it was a really warm reception all round. But for 13 years, we were talking about this last night at the dinner, for 13 years all you've had from the Labour Party at the TUC dinner is the leader of the opposition. And that means that you go along and you say, this is what we will do, if we're elected into government, not what we are doing, because we are in government. That's the bit we've got to change, because otherwise, I mean, I've been in politics now since 2015, that's whatever it is, 8 years. I've been in opposition the whole time. So it means that most of the time in Parliament we vote and we lose. And that isn't what I came into politics for. That's not what the Labour Party was formed for. We were formed to be in power. So that's why that relationship is really important to us. And that's why we've taken the decisions we have to ensure that we can hopefully persuade people the next election to vote Labour and then really bring about the change that we desperately need in this country.
We told you there'd be some robust questions, didn't we?
No, it's good.
Here's
This
another
is
one
good.
from Abby Phelan at Sacred Heart, and it's on the thorny topic of Brexit.
So did you support Brexit, and if so, do you think it's worked, or if no, how can things be fixed?
I didn't support Brexit. I voted for Remain and campaigned for Remain, and we lost. And now we've left. And I think that the deal we've got isn't good enough. I think we need a better deal than that, whether that's in Northern Ireland or whether it's here in the rest of the United Kingdom. But I would say this, I think the phrase that really resonated in 2016 was take back control. And I think for many people, the more they asked themselves the question, do I have enough control, the more the answer came back no. So people who felt, I can't control where I might go to university, I can't control what's happening in my environment, I can't control what's happening in my workplace, and a sense of things needed to change. And one of my concerns about Brexit is that we've talked a lot about the deal and the technicalities of trade, really important. Have we really addressed the underlying issue, which is people feeling, actually I can't influence things, I can't change things in my place? Some of the stuff we've been talking about this morning, and I think we need to address that side of Brexit as well. But we do need a better deal, we need a closer deal, and that's where we would take the debate. I think having left, there is no case now for rejoining. And actually, when I talk to European leaders, they're not saying to the UK rejoin. They want to just make sure the relationship is a better relationship than we've got now.
So our next question is from Jude Stevenson from Bluecoat, and it's about proportional representation. Thanks, Jude.
Jude.
Last year at the Labour Party conference, delegates voted for call on the party to commit to proportional representation. Would you consider yourself in favour of this? And would this be something we would be likely to see should Labour enter the government after the next election?
Yeah, look, in the Labour Party and the Labour movement, there's undoubtedly, a very powerful campaign for proportional representation, and it's important that we engage with that. But we have to face a number of concrete realities. The first is, whatever people think of PR, we're going into the next election with the system we've got, which is first past the post, and therefore, we've got to fight with the system that we've got. So I have to win in the constituencies where we didn't win last time, in order to get a Labour victory, hopefully at the next election. So going into that election, this is the system we're running. You may like it or not like it. It's a bit like debates we have about the media, where some people say, well, it's a bit unfair that the media seems to be in favour of this party or that party. Well, I can moan about that uphill and down dale. We're going into the election in those circumstances, and I've got to concentrate on the fights that we need to have going in the circumstances. Then you get the other side of the election, because I'm sure you come back to you say, well, that's all very well, but the other side of the election. If we come into power, we're going to inherit a real mess, in my view. It's the worst state of the country for a very long time. Obviously in 1945, when Labour won after the Second World War, for very obvious reasons, there was a lot of devastation and rebuilding. It's not as bad as that, but it's as bad as it's been for decades. And therefore, I'm really clear, we've got to prioritise what are we able to achieve, and I've set out what I want us to achieve, which is we've got to grow the economy, because without that, we're not going to give the opportunities and aspiration and run the public services that we need. So we've got to grow the economy. That has to be the number one. The second is we need to go to clean power by 2030, fast forward on net zero, see it as an opportunity, not an obligation. The third one is on education and skills. We've got to smash that class ceiling. We've got to enable every child and young person to have the best opportunity. On health, mentioned today, we've got to not just get the NHS back on its feet, but make it fit for the future. And then fifthly, we've got to have an environment which people feel safe in their community, and that's about policing and other matters. Now, they're the 5 things I've set out that we want to achieve. We don't have the bandwidth for anything else, and therefore this is about priorities for me. So, obviously I do know there's a strong feeling in the Labour Party, but that isn't a priority for me, either going into or the other side of the election, because we've got too much on our hands already.
Okay, we are back to Calderstones now, and Jake Bannon with a subject very close to me now, actually, which is local council finances.
In light of Birmingham City Council's bankruptcy and the struggles of Liverpool City Council, can you give us a detailed plan how can you operate for local councils from the Labour government?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd want to say is that Birmingham is simply the latest in a number of councils that have gone under because of their finances, and it's councils of different political colours that have gone under, and one of the driving reasons for that is the underfunding, the chronic underfunding that's gone on, including here in Liverpool. You'll all be familiar with that. So we have to address that. In order to address that, we've got to do 2 things. Firstly, we have to grow the economy, because the only way in the end to get the yield, the money that we need to run our councils better, all of our public services better, will only come if we grow the economy. The second thing is I do think we need to move the settlement. Most councils are on a year-by-year settlement with the government. That makes it really difficult for them to plan, very difficult to take long-term decisions. And I think that we've got to look again at the funding, whether that can't be done on a longer-term basis, which will actually be a much more effective use of funds. But listen, I ran a public service for 5 years, the Crown Prosecution Service, including with staff in this city that I worked with. Were in the Liver building at the time. And I fundamentally and passionately believe in public services. So, and Labour governments always invest more in public services, and the next Labour government will have that same passion as we go through the election and out the other side.
Next question is from Abhilash at Sacred Heart, and you've got a question about the House of Lords.
Oh yeah.
Do you believe the House of Lords needs to be reformed?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very difficult to defend the current House of Lords. Would anybody here defend the House of Lords as it is? So I think, firstly, there's got to be change and reform, and actually we got Gordon Brown, as you may have seen, to do a big piece of work for us on various bits of reform, but that included the House of Lords. And he put forward a proposal which I agree with, which is to move from what we've got to an elected chamber. Now, I agree that we've got good expertise in there, and obviously part of the challenge is how you keep that. But I think you also need more powerful voices in the House of Lords. One of the proposals that Gordon Brown put on the table was, why not some of your mayors or elected local leaders being in the House of Lords? Now, that would give Liverpool a powerful voice in the House of Lords, because Steve Rotherham might be in the House of Lords, or whoever is in that position. And so I do think there's a real case now for change, and we're committed to changing the House of Lords. What Boris Johnson and soon Liz Truss are doing is just devaluing the House of Lords. I mean, Boris Johnson's sort of putting all his mates in. I mean, it's one thing to reward years and years of public service, a top consultant, somebody who ran the vaccine task force. You might say, well, I can see a case under even this system why you might put them forward, but to put forward your political allies I think is very questionable. And Liz Truss's list of the people she wants in the House of Lords were the people who advised her that led to the crashing of the economy, and all of us paying the price. That just brings it into further disrepute. Now, having said that, the House of Lords does do a really good job at the moment in terms of scrutinising legislation. So we need to retain what works well, but change fundamentally the House of Lords. The House of Commons should stay dominant, by the way. So even when we've got an elected second chamber, the House of Commons needs to be the dominant body that has the power at the end of the day.
Otherwise, at the moment, the Lords is actually doing more scrutiny than the Commons.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
because they've got a big majority and they're firing through legislation. It falls to the House of Lords to do something about it. Good, thank you.
Okay, is it me?
It's you.
So we are on to back to Bluecoat, and James Moran has a question about tuition fees.
James.
Yeah, if Labour were to come to power, would you consider swiftly slashing interest rates on student loans or even abolishing tuition fees retrospectively?
Yeah, I mean, on tuition fees, I think the current system doesn't work fairly or effectively. Therefore, we're going to have to change it. And I'm very interested in your views on how we do that. One of the things that I was initially attracted to was abolishing tuition fees. Having now looked at the state of the country's finances, I think that's impossible, and therefore we won't make that choice. But we do have to, and we will set out proposals that are fairer and more efficient than the current system. You know, some people say, well, you said you wanted to abolish tuition fees and now you don't. The truth is that the state of the finances, as you will have all seen, has changed, and difficult choices have to be made. Do you want to put your money in your health service, or do you want to get rid of tuition fees? If you can't have both, which would you do? Let's do a straw poll. Assume for a moment you've got to make that choice. Abolish tuition fees or put more money in the NHS. Who would go for the NHS? Who would go for tuition fees? Yeah, I think that probably reflects the general mood.
And these guys are about to go to university.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And that's why you will look very carefully at what we're doing. And when we get to that stage, you know, give us your views as well. Good, thank you.
I'll move on to Calderstones and Mr. Derbyshire, who's got a question about the Sun.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just wondering if you regretted the interview that you did with the Sun newspaper.
No, but I know why you're asking. And I absolutely understand the strength of feeling here in Liverpool in relation to the Sun and Hillsborough, obviously, in particular. And I respect that. I deeply understand it. Before I was elected in as a politician, as you probably know, I was Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 to 2013, so in charge of all prosecutions in England and Wales. And whilst I was in post, the panel reported on Hillsborough, and therefore the chance came to reinvestigate and to see whether criminal charges could be brought. And I was consulted very early on as to what I thought about that. And I said, the first thing I want to do is to meet the families. So I came here to Liverpool and met the families. And they talked me through what this meant for them, the years and years of pain and grief that they had been through. Some of those families had said for many years what they'd been through and campaigned hard. Some of the people I spoke to had never spoken about it since the day it happened, because the grief was so deep. So I do completely understand that. I think the question that I have to answer is, what are you going to do about it? And that's why we're committed to Hillsborough law, which will mean that no family in future is put in that position, and ensuring that we usher in a Labour government that's able to change some of these fundamentals. In order to do that, I have to reach the maximum audience, and that includes people who read The Sun. So I sort of respectfully understand the position and the challenge that you and others would put to me, deeply understand it, but it is my job to try and win that election by reaching as many voters as we can to say this is our diagnosis of what's wrong with the country, and this is what, should you put your trust in us, we will do to improve it. Thank you.
Do we have time for another round of questions, do you think?
I think have we got time for a couple more? Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
brilliant.
quickly on Hillsborough law, while we've got you. You said at conference last year it was going to be an early priority for a Labour government. Is that still
Yeah,
the
it
case?
is. Yeah. And I worked on previous versions of what this might look like, and we have pressed amendments a number of times. And I think there's still room for improving what might actually be in that law, but it should definitely have a representative of families in situations like this, so they're not left without a voice. The second thing is that there's a massive injustice in some of the legal proceedings where those that are alleged to have done something wrong are lawyered up to the hilt with expensive lawyers, and families are left without the means for effective representation, and we have to do something about that. That is an early priority. We've pushed the amendment now. I'd still say to the government, if you're prepared to go down this route, we will vote with you. But obviously, if we do come into power, then we can change the law. But for all those that have waited this long already, we shouldn't be able to wait another year for an election and a Labour government to do this. So we need to keep pushing the government to say, actually, if you put this forward, we will all back it. There wouldn't be a division on it. We might think it should go further or whatever, but we will vote for it. And so that's an open sort of challenge against the government. Here's something that should be done and could be done. Get on with it.
Okay, I think we're wrapping up. There's one question that we actually wanted to ask about a few stories that we've been doing recently, which is where you stand on the issue of dangerous dogs. Because we've obviously seen some pretty traumatic incidents recently. We've seen the Home Secretary looking at a potential ban. Is that something you
I
would
think there's a
support?
clear case for a ban. Obviously, we'll see what the Home Secretary comes up with. But some of you will have seen the footage over the weekend, and I don't think anybody can look at that and say everything's fine. So I'm in the camp of saying there's a good case for a ban, and say to the government, put your proposals on the table and we can probably make progress.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Apologies, I know there's a few of you and we didn't get round to your questions. I'm really sorry about that. I think some of the subjects were covered with some of your other answers. So, yeah,
I think we've got a few minutes now if you guys want to
Yeah.
chat to Keir and get some pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for doing this with me this morning. It's really good. And I will take away what you said back to me as to what you think should happen, because that, in a sense, is the most important part of this from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bill,
you
thank
for
you.
joining us.
Thank you both.
Thank you.